Hey everybody, Nicolette here with Insomnicat Media. Today, Brian and I are going to chat with Sandra Lopez, Vice President of Intel Sports Group, about storytelling, immersive media, leadership, mentoring, and a whole bunch more. So stay tuned. Hi everybody, I'm Nicolette Amino, and today Brian and I are chatting with Sandra Lopez, VP at Intel Sports Group, right? We're so excited to have you on with us today. We read such amazing things about your career path and how you got to where you are today. We'd love to learn a little bit more about you. Can you give us some background?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always good to kind of start when I was a little girl, and kind of because it helps tell the story of how I landed in tech. When I was a little girl, I was always enamored with fashion, and I was enamored with it because I saw when people dressed up and how it could inspire them and lift their spirits. And then I went to college to study that specifically, as well as a business degree. And what I realized over time, and I went into fashion, my first part of my career, was I wasn't necessarily enamored by like the design itself. I was enamored by how clothing can affect culture and society. And a year and a half into my career in fashion, I happened to be in Silicon Valley, and I was looking at, well, what is this technology? Albeit it took a software language, COBOL, in college, and it wasn't something that really interested me, so I decided to leave that. Yet what I realized is that technology was going to fundamentally change how society would interact and how humans would interact. And I took a leap of faith and said, I'm leaving something that I was so passionate as a little girl and pursuing a career in technology. And oftentimes, like, how did you make that pivot? And a lot of what I was doing in the world of fashion was arguably building a brand and brand marketing. And so I took those skill sets and parlayed it into marketing roles within the technology industry. And ever since then, I have been in tech working. I worked for over 11 different companies, startup, mid-size, and large. And there's a common theme across every opportunity that I have taken is really about being a builder. I don't like to take on roles that are kind of status quo. So as an example, if there was an opening and somebody left and like, hey, please come on board and continue to lead and manage the team, that's not something that I would normally pursue, which kind of lays into the world of technology. Technology is always innovating and building and changing, and that fits right into my personality. So I have taken roles where organizations have not existed, and I have been recently, over the past 7 years, really passionate about new markets. And how do you create a new market within a large company and work with various partners at the same time, try to condition the market, whether it's fans or businesses, to adopt your technology. So one, I pursued those type of opportunities of a kind of being a builder. And then the other thing that is really important for the females that are listening to this podcast, as well as men, is that I always say that's, basically 60% of my success has been attributed to sponsors and mentors, 30% my intellect, and 10% luck. And so I couldn't be here today with the men and women that have mentored me in different scenarios. And I always like to say mentors are my advisors. So they advise me of what it feels like coming back to work after having a child. How do I have the courage to ask for a raise? And then a sponsor is your advocate, the one that's going to say, Sandra's deserving of that next title, or Sandra should take a lead in that particular project or initiative that gives you exposure within the company and outside the industry. And so I have now begun to call like my mentors and sponsors more my board of advisors. And that's very critical in terms of people that are interested in propelling their career. You have to have that. That is a mandatory, which means that you need to allocate time for yourself and your professional development and actively seek out those mentors and sponsors.
Well, that kind of leads to, and the next thought I had, I don't have the publications offhand, but a couple of you've been named one of the top most powerful women in tech, and I mean that's a pretty awesome thing. And so tech is a pretty male dominated space. So what do you say to those women who are now embarking on a career in a very male dominated profession, be it tech or engineering, something like that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I will be completely honest. For the first half of my career, I was more or less invisible. I had to figure out my place in the male-dominated world, and you have to somewhat play by the rules, right? So if you're there to break the rules, you're naturally going to be isolated or become an outlier. And so understanding carefully how do you play the rules and kind of assimilate to them. That's what's kind of the first half of my career was hiding my ethnicity in terms of being Mexican American, hiding my womanhood. And when I say womanhood, I know you walk into the building, they know that I'm basically a woman by the way I look, but I dressed I dressed in suits, and my shoes that I loved in terms of pretty pumps were much more masculine looking in terms of square foot, traditional, more masculine, if anything. And then I would play the game, like go to learn how to play golf, do the happy hours, and participate somehow, some way to fit in. And then there was this point in my career that somebody asked me, well, what does it feel like to be a Latina in corporate America? And I honestly had no idea what he was talking about because I never made my ethnicity and womanhood an issue. And it was a question that was driving me crazy, honestly, for several months because I realized that for half of my career I covered my ethnicity, I covered my gender, which means that I was never bringing my true self to work. And then I began to remove the mask and realize that as a woman, I had the responsibility to represent 50% of the population. As a Latina, we are one of the early adopters in technology. I grew up bicultural, so by very nature, I appreciate different perspectives. And the power of diversity in a room allows you to create healthy tension, which results in better products or better solutions. And if I reflect back that the first half of my career, I don't think I gave companies my all. And now, knowing who I am as an individual, knowing how I could take my experience as well as my personal upbringing and my ethnicity to bring value to the organization was the catalyst for me to become much more vocal. And recognizing that many men and females opened the door for me, it's now my responsibility to open the doors for the next generation. And it manifests in little ways. So I can be in a room and I know who the introverts are, male or female, and I know they have a very strong point of view that will help us be better, and making sure that in big conversations that their voices are heard and say, Mark, what do you think? What's your perspective? And opening the doors to make sure that he's comfortable enough to have that conversation. Or one time, because we're in sports, and it's assumed that it's always men, there's a brilliant woman who is both technical as well as understands business relationships and is very well spoken. And the team was challenging, should we have a woman spokesperson or should it be male? Because there's an assumption that men want to read for men. And I said, no, she has the expertise. She is the only one that can speak to what is being asked from the press and media. And I was there to ensure that she got the opportunity. If I was not there, I don't think she would have received the opportunity. And she nailed it. And ever since then, she has become highly respected within our organization. And so I look back and it's the little things that matter. It's also recognizing in this whole #MeToo that men are not bad. 80% of my males and sponsors and mentors are men, and they're here to help you out. And so having that conversation that it's together we're both on a journey to drive equality. And I go back, it's a long-winded answer, I go back to people that have opened the doors for me in the past, it's now my opportunity to open the doors and highlight the micro inequities in a way that people don't get defensive, to talk to men in terms of why maybe calling me girl in the office setting is not appropriate, and driving non-confrontational conversations. And so I think with that, people have recognized the commitment that myself and my team have in terms of driving positive change within the organization, within Intel, and the broader community.
So one of the things you do at Intel now, and I know we spoke about this a few years ago when we were talking about immersive media, and you know, I recall you talking about this new generation of storytelling, and we talk about storytelling all the time. You know, we think it's a really important aspect, especially when it comes to your company's content and things like that we're related to. But, you know, storytelling as a whole, you know, have things changed since we last spoke? And how do you kind of envision this next generation of storytelling looking from where you're sitting?
Yeah, I mean, since we last spoke, probably you were saying 3 years ago, it has advanced significantly, and oftentimes it's because technology accelerates at a significant pace. And it's the merging of storytelling and technology. And how that's changing is that storytelling in the past has been very passive, and it triggers some of the senses, right? So hear, sight is kind of the two primary senses. But when you talk about the next generation of storytelling, which is much more, we call it at Intel, immersive media, you are absorbed in that story. Arguably, you become one of the actors in that storyline. So what it does is it triggers many more senses. It helps increase your overall memory of that experience. And I like to use the example of, I'll do sports and I'll just do like a typical entertainment, but in sports has now become global. And let's recognize that somebody in a tier 3 city in China who is a fanatic NFL fan, he or she won't be able to necessarily go and watch their favorite team. And if we can transport him or her into the game, not only like front row seats, but they now have the opportunity to see what their favorite player sees. So if it's a running back, from his perspective, if they want to see like, hey, I want to be a referee in one day in my life, like they can see the play unfold from a referee's point of view. And that's what true immersion is. And that's due to technology, which we call volumetric video. And the most simplistic way, not to bore you with the technology, is it's taking pixels, which are squares, transforming them into cubes, which is three-dimensional, and three-dimensional allows you to look at things from all angles. So simply put, you capture one play and you have infinite perspectives. And so that allows a fan to really feel what a quarterback is feeling during that play. And I'm using NFL because it's NFL season. And similarly, when we've been working with studios, and one of the things that I had so much fun interacting with is Reggie Watts. It's called Run-In. And I could immerse myself and I could be with him dancing. And it's funny when people immerse themselves in that experience, naturally, because music is something that you want to dance to, but the way they're dancing and how they're laughing, they feel that they're part of that. Mm-hmm. So it's really turning on the various senses into that experience. So I think storytelling is absolutely changing in that way. And then I also call it like the empathy engine. Imagine that you could be somebody that is in a war-torn area and you understand what they're feeling. And so if you're a family member and he or she's coming back from war, to understand what they saw, and that helps drive empathy. You can't, and experience it firsthand, the gunshots, being on the streets and kind of figuring out which turn you're going to take. It just takes story level to the next level. And I think that's what we're really excited about in terms of how storytelling, leveraging technology for good, could really bring people into the game, into the experience, and help drive empathy and or excitement for what they're experiencing.
So now, do you believe there's going to be sort of two levels of it, one that's sort of more active and one that's a little more passive? Meaning,
Yeah.
meaning, for instance, like I'm sitting there watching the game and it has this real feel to it as if I'm in the stadium, and then you said, all right, you're the referee, so you can see that point of view where it's more active. Do you believe it's really two stages in that, like a passive?
I 100% agree. Look, let's just recognize that we're all individuals.
Right.
And individuality, which because we're all individuals, we want more freedom of choice. So some people will do both. They'll be passive and they'll be active. Some people will continuously be passive. Like if my dad was still here, he would absolutely be on the couch watching, and he would not be interacting in any way with some of the immersive media. That is his style, which is great. But somebody like my daughter, she grew up with gaming. She grew up being, she does her own YouTube videos. And for her, it's about control and freedom and her choosing what she wants to see, not necessarily a cameraman or woman kind of projecting what they think my daughter would like to see. So at this point, I think it's always going to be both. I don't think it's going to pivot at one point in time, years from now, that it's going to be active. It's going to be both passive and active.
So what's interesting is I've seen a lot of stuff where they're really looking at, time, right? It's not just your dimensional. It's like, okay, let's go back to, 1420 and look at what's going on here, and where they actually know here's the projection of what existed. Here's the projection of the sun on that day at that time. Do you see that also becoming part of it? Like where they use it as a teaching aid, so they could go, okay, here's what it was like to live, or here's what it looked like when the Mayflower came over, pick, you see that being a tool in the future?
Absolutely. I think you can take storytelling in any perspective in terms of like the usage. So I'm also part of the VR/AR Council for the World Economic Forum, which brings a diverse set of individuals in this immersive media space, storytellers, professors, policymakers, and what we've seen. I mean, one of the greatest stories that I saw just recently is Striver is a vendor supplier for Walmart, and they did training, and one of the trainings was for unexpected situations such as gun violence. And because they were prepared, they are able to kind of simulate situations that makes them much more prepared. So that's one scenario. The other one is that, yes, we have seen in terms of schools and academic applying these capabilities to what does it feel like when you were in the Mayflower, or also in the medical space, simulating operations. So there's so many different manifestations of how you want to use the technology. I always just challenge everybody is making sure that you're using it for good. That's really, really important, and having that filter. And I think we're just starting to see the cusp of what is the beginning of the next generation of immersive media. And you're seeing that because you see Sundance, they have a XR, VR section. You see Tribeca, their XR, VR. And so the entertainment industry now has a channel, if you will, around immersive media. It means all these creative people are leaning in and interested of like, what can this technology do? And the engineers get really excited of like, how can we help meet the needs of this customer set? So I believe if we look 5 years ahead, you'll start to see close to mass adoption of the next generation immersive media format and storytelling.
So we talk about storytelling in terms of companies marketing their products. So you have quite a bit of a marketing background as well. How do you see storytelling, whether it be in the immersive media space or storytelling, simply telling stories like the old days, right? How do you see storytelling kind of evolving for brands?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's so much noise. And brands now need to realize that selling a feature or service in a point in time is no longer going to cut it. Like the next generation of, millennials and Gen Z want to know what's behind that brand. And in order to tell what's behind the brand and the mission and the purpose beyond a particular feature set is storytelling. And so you're seeing one is the communication strategy change from what was traditional in advertising that would actually highlight a feature to really moving towards the story of the brand. And then the question is, how do you tell the story best? And there's still going to be 2D linear. I also see the emergence of, we have some brands that we are working with using immersive media where it makes sense. So bringing them into the story because they want them to be part of the character of the storyline, or they want them to evoke the emotion and feeling of what it feels like to be part of that experience. So like in Greece, it's something that we partnered with. There is a song that we've highlighted, and you can kind of bring yourself into that journey. So brands are absolutely starting to, one, evolve their communication strategy, and that's agnostic of medium. And now the next question is, well, how do I best bring that story to life? And you are starting to see augmented reality, VR, volumetric video. I would say in the exploration stages, I think once, because it requires you to think about storytelling differently. And it's not linear. It's not how you do your typical 15, 30-second spot because your consumer is engaging in that content. So it also requires the creative industry to think about storytelling differently. And it's the combination of the both, which is an amazing journey. And I get to see it firsthand when I'm at Intel Studios or working with our production team in terms of how can we push the envelope on the technology? How can we push the envelope on the storytelling to provide our consumers and fans a perspective that they couldn't have before? And those conversations, I get excited because you're watching really history unfold, because they're starting to create the future today, and it's requiring these people to think about the role of creative differently, and the technologists and engineers to be somewhat creative as well. And so I start to see this hybrid. I was just responding to somebody at the Grace Hopper conference that's happening right now. It's the largest conference for technical female engineers, and I said we were showcasing one of our volumetric video experiences. And I said, this is so great to illustrate the power of technology and creative coming together. Oftentimes people think engineering is boring and it's very linear, but it's like music and technology, art and technology, storytelling and technology. And I think with that, it's going to create all these new roles and positions that have never existed before. And I think that's exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting when you look at that creative process, right? And you apply that to anything. You start being able to change the game or change the industry, and that's what really makes it magic.
Yeah, I think so. And and being part of history and creating these new experiences and really seeing, I go back to the Reggie Ross and the running, because when people start dancing and they get so excited, sometimes it takes people out of their element. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize this other side of you existed. And you're starting to see the power of like, wow, how this technology can let somebody that's a little bit more strict and conservative let loose a little bit. And they remember it. And you talk to them months later, like, that experience was so fun. I can now see where storytelling is going and when it's really taken in all of your senses. And eventually we're going to add, smell. And so you're really going to feel like you're in the midst of a scene of a movie.
That is so cool. Brian, before I ask one of the last things that I really wanted to know from Sandra, do you have anything else you wanted to talk about in terms of storytelling and marketing? Or?
You know what? I actually want to go back just quick to the mentoring piece, because that's always a big thing with me. And, over my career, same thing. I always felt like you have to give back, right? A lot of people did it for you as you went through your career. So how do you, because it's always interesting, and sometimes you're mentoring multiple people at the same time, and sometimes you're spending a lot of time on one person. How do you wind up going, because how do you go, okay, this is the person I'm really going to spend my time with, right? Because it's an investment. So how do you make that decision? Sometimes it just happens naturally, I think. And then sometimes sort of go, I see a lot of potential here that they may not even see in themselves. And how do you go, okay, how do you make that decision? This is the person, or this is the time I'm going to invest in this person. I know they need to want it too for you to do that, but how do you sort of mentally go, make that decision in some ways? Because I think we all go,
yeah, that was ironic. So today is monthly mentor day. So what has happened is that a couple months ago, I kept on getting people, hey, in some cases, some people just want, I have a problem, I need your help, how do you guide me? And then some people I have a long-term problem, can you help me in that journey? And so what I decided to do was, instead of having sporadically across my calendar, can we pick one day a month? It could be anybody internally, externally, that I will accept meetings around 30 minutes, and I can talk to them. And that's when I have a sense of, this person has so much potential, and if he or she wants more time with me, they know that they can schedule time the next month, and I will do that. And to me, it's rewarding because, one, I'll either learn something about myself in the process, and two, I was just recently asked the question, like, what am I most excited about in my career? And honestly, it's the emails that I get of how somebody was so unhappy in their job, and they landed a job that they never knew existed, and they're the happiest person. Or that person just recently, it was a year journey where she was kind of bored in her current organization. These group of young females decided to have lunch with me, and they scheduled it. So I sat down, and then she followed up specifically, and she was trying to figure out how she makes a pivot in her career. And she happens to love sports, and so I would tell her when openings would happen, and so she would either apply or not. And so she applied for one. She didn't get it, which is okay. She didn't probably have the skill sets. And then she told me, well, she didn't get it. And I said, well, why don't you tell me that you applied so I can put a good word in? And she's like, oh, I think she was saying that I was too busy. I'm like, I'm never too busy. All it takes is me sending out an email and highlighting what I believe are your strengths based on our interactions. And it's up to you to show up and get the job, right? I can only open the door. And so the next time there's another role that actually aligned better with her skill sets. And so she sent me a note, and I sent a note to the hiring manager and the hiring manager's boss to really take her into consideration. She was interviewed, and she got the job. And I think those are the powerful stories that I get excited about in terms of being able to help people out. And I don't have a clear filtering mechanism. I just have a sense of who's real, to your point, like who's really passionate, who's not ready. In some cases, I said, you don't have a lot of clarity of where you want to go next. I am so confused. So do me a favor, go be reflective, and here are tools that I think you can use to be reflective, and come back and help me. I need clarity so I can help you. I can't start with, I can't be so broad that I can't even know who to contact to help you. And so that's what I tend to do on the mentoring side. On the sponsorship side, they're very selective. It's either an individual that I know I can help because I'm close to their organization and I could advocate at a executive management level for that person to get the next role, or it's somebody that I know is looking to move into very specific type of organization, and I can leverage my network to have him or her interview these individuals. And I know when I ask a very senior person at the C-level, spend an hour with them for coffee, it means because I really believe in them, and I know hour is precious, that it's worthy of that person to meet with that particular individual to get their next role.
Very cool.
And so, Sandra, on that topic a little bit, you lead teams, right? So, I mean, one of the things that's kind of trending. I mean, you see a lot of this on LinkedIn about terrible bosses and poor leadership and all these things. So, I kind of wanted to know, how do you conduct meetings with your staff? What are the tools you use? How does that work? How does that go for your team?
Yeah, I mean, arguably how I led I would say there are transitions in your career. from individual to manager, and that big transition is how do you let go and trust your team. And so I had an executive coach to guide me through that transition. And then the big one is when you're a manager and you get elevated to broader scope and responsibility, what I have learned through an executive coach, it was a 3-year journey, most importantly is having empathy and being kind and being human. And so I had to change my style. Like I used to be like business, and I had staff meetings. I'm like, okay, here are the pass downs, what's going on, here's what's great, here's what's bad. And I evolved my style in terms of, did everybody have a great weekend? How's everybody feeling? You know what, I know there's a lot of anxiety. I have anxiety. Here's why I have anxiety. I'm very honest about, you know what, guys, my father's going through a tough time. He has been diagnosed with cancer. I need you guys to step up because I'm not fully here. And I think the level of vulnerability, I mean, I'm very vulnerable. I say things that people are like, wow, an executive is actually being vocal or disclosing X, Y, Z. I think that's how you build trust. And I think that great teams are like a family, because if you feel like we're all family, anybody can, there's safety in, you know, Sandra, you didn't really help us here. I mean, they can actually say that and not feel like they're actually going to be retaliated. And I think that's really important. My job is to create an environment that everybody feels like they could be outspoken, even if it's constructive, and not feel like it's retaliated. And my responsibility is always to understand each person at an individual level and ensure that they understand their full potential. And sometimes their full potential is moving on to a different organization because I think they can add more value, not because I want them to leave. I handpick a lot of my team members, but because I want them to add value to the organization where I think they can add more value in a different group, and/or I want them to realize that they're capable of doing it. And so you kind of have to be selfless. And to your point, Nicolette, there's a lot of conversations around emotional intelligence. I think the past successful leaders had high IQ, and for successful, the times have changed. Your EQ has to be on par with your IQ, and that's why there are leaders like Sancha from Microsoft that I highly respect in terms of how he communicates. The choice of words is a reflection of a leader that has both EQ and IQ. There are leaders here within the walls of Intel that display that extremely well. And I think every day we learn. Every day I'm learning. Every day I can be doing something differently. And I always tell my team, like, hold me accountable if I'm not delivering on the values of our organization. And tell me real time so I become self-aware. And I share that with my colleagues as well. I think that's really important. We're always growing. We're always learning. And so as I grow, I hope that others grow along with me. And the responsibility is making sure that unlock their potential, like really unlock the potential. And sometimes it's, you know what, you're not the right fit for Intel. You never really like technology, so it's killing you to come to work every day. How can I help you transition out and have a job outside of Intel? And those are honest, trustworthy conversations. A lot of leaders don't want to have conversations around, like, maybe you're not going to be here 3 years from now, and that's okay. That's a reality. Like that. And great, if you get recruited by another amazing company, I am so proud. That means that I did my job, you did your job, and you are growing and you're succeeding.
Thank you. That's awesome. So those are really some of the things that we wanted to talk about today. Brian, am I missing anything?
No, I think you got everything. Sandra, thank you for spending time with us today. We appreciate it.
We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it was so fun, and hope to see you. Are you guys going to go to South by or anything like that? Will I get to see you guys in person anytime soon, or maybe when I go to New York?
If you're in New York, let us know. We'd love to meet with you.
Okay. So I go to New York often, so maybe we have an opportunity to grab coffee. And thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it. It's great for other people to hear other people's stories. And I'll be listening to your podcast as well and sharing it with my team and make sure that they have it on their podcast list of people to listen to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.